Hello and welcome to I've Never Read Discworld with myself, PJ Hart, and as always, I'm joined by.
Andy Luke, hello. I've never
Hello,
read Discworld.
hello indeed. So we're back to the regular format this month. This is a book I have read. We're on book number 6. It's called Wyrd Sisters. We're back with the witches. So let's just dive straight in, Andy, shall we?
Yeah,
Pop,
publication details
sure.
10th of November 1988. That's 6 months after Sorcery was released, and by Victor Galland's.
I mean that bears comment almost immediately. Like we
6 months, wow, yeah.
Yeah, we talked a lot about how much story there was in Sorcery. Like that was an incredibly plot dense book, and then he's like turning this one on a dime like 6 months later, and we'll get into. And obviously, I straight away I'm going to say I think he stuck the landing on this one. You know, he's turned around 6 months later with probably the best one to date. So that's no small feat by any means. So let's talk a little bit about what it is. So you've graced us every month with the blurb from the back of the Kirby covered softback editions from the 80s and 90s. We thought we'd maybe mix it up a little bit. I'm going to start, if Andy doesn't mind, with the current blurb as presented on the Discworld Emporium website for the most up-to-date new cover edition. And it goes like this. Destiny is important, see, but people go wrong when they think it controls them. It's the other way around. Meet the Lanker Witches, Granny Weatherwax, Nanny Og, Magrat Goldrick, the magical cast of characters take center stage in Terry Pratchett's bewitching Discworld novel, but even witches can't control the complications of reinstating a royal dynasty when the struggle for the throne of Lanker turns theatrical. A child heir and the royal crown both missing. Witches don't have these kinds of leadership problems themselves. In fact, they don't have leaders. Granny Weatherwax is the most highly regarded of the leaders they don't have. But even she finds that meddling in royal politics is a lot more complicated than certain playwrights would have you believe, particularly when the blood on your hands just won't wash off. Wyrd Sisters is the second book in the Witches series, but you can read the Discworld novels in any order. That's it. There you go. It's a bit of a mouthful.
That is pretty much identical to the version I have, which I think might be a first.
That's interesting.
Yeah, well, it's like a translated version, beginning with witches are not by nature gregarious, and bring
Okay.
Granny Weatherwax in there. I've also got this alternative edition, although it's called the Complete of William Shakespeare. So
that was a bargain. Is that the complete works for £1?
for £1, yeah.
That is a bargain.
Bargain books.
There's £1 worth of paper in that, just yeah.
And
so yeah, obviously, I mean, hopefully, if you're listening to us, you're up to speed on the books and you're aware that there's big Shakespeare connotations within this book. That's the certain playwrights of reference in the blurb. So, did you find yourself thumbing through your complete works of Shakespeare on the regular when you were reading it? Or?
Did not get to that 700-page A4 thing. Although it's conjured up so much. I mean, Shakespeare obviously is in popular culture now as much as Campbell's Monomyth is. What I did find, I was surprised how much I got. I mean, I know I've read Macbeth, I've read Antony and Cleopatra.
Okay.
I think I read Hamlet.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Like, as long as you've read Macbeth and you've read Hamlet, like those are the two that are getting riffed on here majorly, aren't they?
And King Lear to some extent.
Yes, true. And that would, of the three, that would be the King Lear would be the one I'd be less familiar with, I guess. So, yeah, I think you're right that even if you're not a big Shakespeare buff or a big Shakespeare fan, so much of those two plays in particular, of Hamlet and Macbeth, they've seeped into pop culture and storytelling. Like you say, you know, like the monomyth is like one Shakespeare style of storytelling is so ubiquitous that it's fine. You'll just go along for the ride with this. So
yeah, we'll talk more about that later, because it really is a sort of a best of Shakespeare big volume remix vibe that's going on here. Generally, first impressions, I loved it. It felt the most complete of all the books so far, and this feeling starts really early on. Now, as a first big confrontation between the witches and the Felmets looms, I feel like I'm reading a complete story, and like a big epic. that's kind of nearing its final act by page 100 or so. There was so much in this.
Yeah, I agree with that. I don't. We were chatting off air just before about how when I got halfway through, I was surprised that I still had half the book to go, and not in that kind of breakneck sort of way that sorcery, where I felt the plot was being flung at me all the time. Like you were saying, I felt like I was immersed in this epic. I guess like that could have ended on a cliffhanger at the midpoint, or could continue to its conclusion, as it did. And yeah, it just felt a lot meatier, for want of a better word, a lot more substantial, I guess. And I think part of that, something I've moaned about a lot, I guess, about the series up until this point, is like the antagonists. And you mentioned Falmouth there straight away, and I think having the omnipresence of a identifiable antagonist, a human antagonist, the whole way through, really helps this one.
Right. The witches are fairly formidable in themselves, and it kind of gets. We had some problems with the luggage last time, being this all powerful thing, and here we have, you know, Felmet is the Felmets aren't quite as powerful as the witches, but there's various levers and gears and pulleys brought in that even that relationship out, and there's little little things we'll come to in regards how well that works out. One problem with it, but anyway, that's, I think I was much too hard on Mort, and Weird Sisters definitely delivers with that sort of iconic reputation. It really gave what I expected it to, and it was a beautiful experience.
Great. Yeah, as I say, I know I've been moaning a lot, but like this, even a little bit about Mort. I know, like, when we did Mort, it was initially enthused, and then I felt that he didn't stick the landing in the way that I'd sort of remembered he did, or had hoped that he would. Whereas, yeah, Weird Sisters does definitely feel like the complete package. I've said that a couple of times now, but this time, this is the real time. um, Interestingly, something I wanted to ask you about, from your kind of first read through, and it's kind of related, will be related to your first impressions of this book, is the return of Granny. And like, does this feel like the same Granny that you met in Equal Rights?
Oh, very much completely consistent, and with more.
Mm.
Granny's kind of one of those characters that arrives fully formed on the page, or at least that's how it felt. And yeah, it's just a joy to get a bit more of that character mapped out and to see that in real time.
That's interesting, because I felt otherwise, but in reverse, which I guess is like the kind of the whole shtick of our experiences. When I read Equal Rights the second time, I just felt that like Granny was missing limbs, because Nanny in particular, and to a degree Magrat, weren't there.
Right.
So like Granny as a solo character, and going back to reading Granny as a solo character in Equal Rights, just felt really different. But you're right, she's not a different character. It's just like her position in that story is really different, because she's not part of like a three-piece the way that she is in this one. And it's not much of a spoiler to say the ones going forward, I guess. And that character dynamic, especially between her and Nanny, is just like so joyous to me. Endless back and forth between them. Just even in this book, which is the first time we see it, it just feels really lived in, really authentic.
Yeah, because I think you could say the same thing for Nanny Og. She's fully formed. We all know a Nanny Og, whether it's Birmingham or Belfast. This elderly lady who knows everybody's business and everybody knows her, and
Yeah.
she's like deeply tied into the community. And in terms of mood, her and Granny couldn't be further apart. But it's completely realized that they, are working alongside one another and have enough of an overlap in their views, so they're a really tight unit.
Yeah, and in terms of how he presents witches and like their what we learned in equal rights, like the service that they provide to society, essentially, that Granny and Nanny have different strengths in that regard. You know, Granny's the tough love and the no nonsense, whereas Nanny's like the vivacious one who'll, like, you know, if something bad's happened to you, she'll bring you in and sit you at the table and give you a nice dinner and a glass of something stiff and kind of soothe you that way. Whereas Granny will give you the tough love and the kick up the bum to get back out there and try again. So I totally agree. And I sort of always wondered if, like, when he first wrote Equal Rights, did he have both those characters in mind and then just decide to pick one? Because, like you say, Nanny is equally as well realized as Granny, even though she's a book behind in that sense. You know, she's arrived a book later.
Yeah, in
And
Equal Rights, I think Nanny has actually much further to travel to be part of Esk's life. And I think that's what I see from this.
yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, and then Magrat, I know we both kind of have like how Magrat's portrayed at times in this book feels like it's a stretch to say problematic, but like it's not. It doesn't feel as comfortable as how he portrays the older witches, I guess. You know, I mean, part of that is, I think, you know, there's going to be a little bit of a love story and all that kind of stuff, and he's quite settled into writing that stuff yet. But
I think we're both agreed that the references to Margaret's chest are both kind of not on really, and
yeah,
off-putting in the repetitiveness of them.
yeah. I mean,
You
I
said
came
it.
up a little bit in Mort as well, I guess, but I do, to give him the benefit of the doubt, because if any writer deserves the benefit of the doubt, it's always Terry Pratchett. I do feel like it's a bit of a generational British humor, you know, a little bit Carry On, that kind of vibe. That's maybe just like culturally, it's on the way in, and it's he's definitely going to find his way out of it. But like coming out of the comedy of like the 1960s and the 1970s, like there's just a little bit of residual kind of cheekiness, I guess, you know, and that plays into some of these earlier novels. But I know that that's going to fall to the wayside pretty quickly. So you just kind of have to, you know, it's good to get that out of the way, because other than that, there is a good concept. Like, you know, some of these big ideas that he's had, comedy kind of set piece ideas, aren't always hits. Like we talked about, like the genie and sorcery. Like we didn't really get what he was trying to do with that. But like the idea that you have these like two Shakespearean witches in Granny and Nanny, and then you have essentially like a new age Wiccan as a witch, like that is a good idea, at least, you know, like from as a comedic proposition, like that is strong. So despite some of the weakness of the execution, like I do like Magrat, and I like her,
Yeah.
as with Rincewind, like I like her a lot more
I found her a
on the
bit
second reading.
tougher to get a handle on. She's a lot more nuanced than the other two.
Yeah,
She's not as firm in her sort of identity. She's a bit more open, and she brings with her the training from this Granny Whimper, God
yeah,
rest
yeah,
her soul.
yeah.
So yeah, I think Magrat rounds off the trio quite well.
Yeah, I love that. I've sort of forgotten about Magrat's mentor. Like this, I so in my head, like Granny Wemper is like a 60s style hippie who's like giving birth to this like Gen X style Wiccan in Magrat, you know, which all feels kind of the time period. So that's how I kind of see them, and I do think for the most part it does work in this book. And Magrat has a bit of a trajectory, obviously beyond this book that I won't go into, but like the foundations that are laid here are stronger than I remember for her, I guess, because the other two characters are so well realized and they are a bit more larger than life. I think they can eclipse her, or they certainly did eclipse her in my memory. So it was nice to get that kind of refresher on the second read. So I can't hide this from you any longer. We had talked about possibly doing like the tea and the witch's brew and all this kind of stuff. So I don't have my witch's hat for this witch's book. So I don't know if you can see how green this is. The lighting's not good for our YouTube viewers. Do you want to hazard a guess what green liquid is in this glass?
I have
No,
no idea.
it's absinthe.
Ah,
Oh, it's absinthe.
potency.
It's absinthe in water. Yeah. Ooh, it's not great. I don't know if it's not worth it for like the whatever 30 people or whoever watches on YouTube. But I thought I might as well, I have this bottle of Vieux Pontarlier absinthe in the cupboard, so maybe they'll sponsor us.
Excellent,
And I
excellent.
also feel
Let me
that I
hit
want to,
flask of that.
yeah, of all the witches that I want to channel, I want to channel Nanny. Like Nanny's my hero of the three witches, and like she would definitely be having a sniff of something strong if she was on recounting the events of this book. So.
Well, with that, let's dive into the story. So
Yes,
the
indeed.
first 57 pages, first act. Verence the First becomes a ghost. Granny Weatherwax finds a baby, and the witches meet the Vitollers. Duke Felmet, who's not the old king, suffers cleaning injuries and sends out for the witches. His fool sleeps on flagstones.
You're really good at writing these, by the way. I
Thank
just want
you.
to say that. So, like, for those listening, just to pull the curtain back slightly, when we do our notes, and I say we, Andy does all the notes, and he breaks down the stories, and they're never these summaries are never more than 3 lines long, and they pack in everything that happens in like 50 to 60 page chunks of the book, and they're absolutely great. So I just want to give you a shout out. Like he doesn't lift these from anywhere. These are labors of love.
I think it's very
So
much a style I picked up from Neil Gaiman, who
yeah,
I think picked it up from Shakespeare.
that guy.
So
So it's great. It really helps me, even though I read this one, I finished reading it last night. Going back to the start, and I think we obviously kind of know we're in the Shakespearean story. We know what's going to happen to the king. We know what's roughly going to happen to the duke, probably. The Vitollers hadn't stuck in my head. My first reading, whatever, 20 plus years ago, but that whole scene, the scene that you're alluding to in your summary, where the witches give them the babies, there's like a lot going on in like a really really short paragraph, where it's not quite subtext, but it's not overtly stated that they couldn't have their own kids,
yeah,
and just like the way that kind of plays between them wordlessly on the page is beautiful. And that like Terry has kids, so that that's not like something that he has direct experience of, but he channels it in this really beautiful way. It's like it's genuinely moving. And that was something that obviously like went straight over my head when I was a kid when I read it, but like when I'm reading it now, I have my own kids and stuff. I'm like, oh, holy shit! That's surprisingly heavy for what at this stage of the series could just be like a Shakespeare parody. But once you get to that scene, the the bar's been raised again in this book, hasn't it?
yeah. I was wondering if maybe because we've had so many books at this early stage with a young child or a baby being handed over and that sort of paternal relationship, and I've begun to wonder, is this a bit of a Pratchett trope or cliche? But it's no, I think it's very much a theme. It seems to be a central part of the author's messaging.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so too. And again, it just shows you how kind of layered these books are, because that isn't something that would have stuck with me. Certainly when I was reading it as a teenager, I would have been focused a lot more on the jokes and the action and stuff like that. But you're right to say that there is a big dollop of that thematically in pretty much all of the books. So that's really interesting.
And just to jump way ahead to Tom John's fate
Yeah.
and providing for him, it's well, actually, no, it's right here in these first 60 pages that it must have been something that was kind of on Pratchett's mind. I don't know what age Rihanna was at this when this came out, but a guy who's he's quit his dependable desk job for that of a freelance writer full time and in creative fantasy. So there's a lot of yourself as a parent and a professional author, there's a lot of burden that comes with that. Sorry for
Yeah.
scaring you again.
It is. It is scary. Like, definitely is. So, yeah, the fact that he places the child with a traveling group of actors, and there's like a lot of ongoing reference to how they're kind of living hand to mouth, and it's like it's a precarious line of work. Like, I empathize with all that, like, huge amount, but I don't think it's these days specific to the creative arts. I think almost all work is precarious to a much greater degree than it would have been in the 80s and 90s. So like if you want to do that kind of work, I think just go for it. Whether you've got young kids or not, because you might as well, you're going to be in some kind of precarity regardless of what you do, unless you're already a billionaire. So
Well, this is a theme that again will come up in our discussion, because we're living in a time where governments in the West more and more declare like a state of war on their populace. And I've been running out of money all week, all month. So yeah, there's some politics in this book, most definitely. King Varence, what did you make of? Do you have any
yeah,
particular thoughts or feelings on?
I think, and
Was he a good king?
no, obviously not. And I think that's what's great about
No.
it. And I know that there is a bit of an issue with this because there quite a lot of the plot is hung on it. So it does interest me though that he's trying to play this thing where like Varence was still a despot's maybe pushing it, but like he's hereditary monarch. He's like not a good guy. Like he has his troops burn down cottages and stuff like that. But like there's a running gag where it's like, yeah, but he was all right about it. Like he let you get out first, and like he was doing it in a friendly way. And there's like a difference between Varence's tyranny and Thelma's tyranny, and it's played as a gag, but I can kind of see your point in that it also kind of dilutes the stakes a little bit, because the whole point of the book is like putting Varence's line back on the throne to a degree and helping out this ghost of this guy who was ultimately kind of a dick. So yeah, like it does make me laugh when it comes up, but with my like slightly more technical storytelling brain engaged, I sort of see that might be one of the really rare instances of the comedy getting in the way of the story in Discworld. I'm not, it's a small thing, but I think I do agree with you on that.
Now, in response, the kingdom is pretty pissed off with Felmet, whereas with under Varence, it's the next one up on
Go for it.
pages 58 to 120. The kingdom is unhappy. 1 year later, tremors hit Lanker Castle and the ram tops on Hog's Watch night. The washroom demon explains the land has woken up and Granny receives a visit from nature. The Vitolers and playwright Hoel are astounded by Tom John's first words. The fool meets the witches. Varence first uses Grebo to lure the witches into a confrontation with the Felmets. Magrat shows her powers. Nanny Og is rescued, and Granny Weatherwax is humiliated. There's a lot going on in just those 60 pages. It never feels too compressed. There's all the right pauses to breathe.
Yeah,
Joyful,
absolutely.
interesting. I think we really need to break this section down a bit as
Yeah,
best
because
as we
it was
can.
by the time we got to the end of this, I was like, yeah, we're well on our way in this book. So yeah, by all means, I felt like you were kind of teeing that up for a particular reason. So pardon me. Yeah, so go for it.
Yes, so I adore the power in the scene where the forest arrives at Granny Weatherwax's home. It's easily my favorite scene in the book.
And it has a
I,
huge payoff, obviously, in the end, which we'll get to.
and it just it feels, yeah, so other level, so epic, but also because we have this sort of not much difference between Varence and Felmet at this stage in the book. It feels a little set off, a little, yeah, set off, I think is a phrase. Although it doesn't change just how amazing that scene is written, where deers and bears and rabbits and birds and trees, everybody is outside Granny Weatherwax's house, and oh
Yeah,
my god,
it's
wow.
all it's awesome, and it reminds me. It takes me back to the scene that I was kind of raving about in Equal Rights, where S kind of loses herself to the brain of the bird, and that deep connection to nature, I guess, that he obviously, I think it's why he likes to write these witches books, at least initially, is because of that. And I absolutely agree. And I think it does feel like a stretch that like at this stage in the story, certainly, that that the kingdom itself is rejecting Felmet, but I think he's aware of that. Like I do think that it's not, the kingdom isn't rejecting Felmet because he's a bad king. The kingdom's an animal in itself. The kingdom's rejecting, and I think they make that analogy. You know, the kingdom's like a cat. The kingdom doesn't care if you care about other people. The kingdom only cares that you care about the kingdom. You know, so it's like a cat in that regard. A cat doesn't care if you're kind to humans. The cat only cares if you're kind to the cat. So I think that analogy does get made in the book, and like as an explanation, it's a bit thin. Fair enough, but at least it exists, you know. And I think it's quite a cool explanation. So I'm kind of happy enough to give him that one. I think, like, I get where you're coming from, but I'm going to allow it.
Fair, fair. The Washroom Demon, I think, was quite a bit of fun.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, a bit of conjuring.
much,
Yeah, you want a bit of that.
It's a Pratchett motif, I think it is.
Kind of it. Yeah, he does like a bit of conjuring. Nobody gets drunk in the pub in this one, though.
Well,
people get drunk, but they don't go to the pub though.
Yeah.
Oh shit, they do. They go to the Mended Drum. Oh man,
Mended
you're gonna
Drum.
have to cut that out.
When it comes to that,
I was thinking there's no pub in Lanker, but we get to go back to the Mended Drum. So yeah, we'll get to that.
Tom John's first words as well were as another. So he's fully enacting plays, soliloquies at this point.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, that also felt quite real, despite being a fairly fantastical scenario.
Yeah. I mean, kids are a handful for sure. But the joy, and the joy in the relationship, that family unit, I guess, that is being constructed there is it's really nuanced. It's really nice to see, and like you say, even though it's a bit fantastical, it has heart, and that's just like the through line through all these bits, because like the timing of this story, because you know that like it starts when Tom John's a baby, and like it's not much of a, like, you can see the trajectory of that story coming a mile off. Like, you know, he's gonna come back to the kingdom as an adult in some shape or form, and you're like, is the timeline of this story gonna be 20 years? So I find these earlier jumps in time that are always like a year or a few months or whatever actually like pretty well handled, considering, you know, the storylines in the previous books have been relatively linear, you know, alternate dimensions and stuff like that aside. You know, so when he starts kind of playing with like big leaps in time and stuff as this early on in the series, it's like, oh, how's this going to work? But it works great. Do you feel that? I mean, do you feel that these sections are rushed with Tom John, or do you feel like they earn their place?
I never got the sense that anything was rushed. I guess I was reading it quite quickly because I felt quite behind. Right.
It's maybe just hitting. No, by all means, I've thrown a bit of a curveball at you, and it could just be one of those ones. Like we're on different wavelengths here, like we are, because it's my second reading of these books. Where like because it didn't hit me weird the first time I read it, so I shouldn't expect it to hit you weird the first time that you've read it, you know. So I'm like, I don't want to put words in your mouth either, or I don't want to like alter your impressions through my second. I don't want to change your first impression through my second impression, you know.
Yeah, I guess I was reading this novel really fast. I think about it, certainly a week I cleared it in.
Yeah, no way.
And
I can't read that fast anymore.
It was, yeah, so I really didn't have much time to question what was coming next.
Yeah, I have this habit now, but I tend to read in like 10 or 15 page chunks like every night now, whereas like back in the day I sat down and read 100 pages, no problem. So actually that experience has probably changed. So when I first read these books, like when I was a teenager, I would have just sat and read for hours, which I don't really do anymore because life or whatever. So maybe that's sort of changing the texture of them a little bit for me too. It's an interesting one. I feel like you want to talk about Grebo.
Grebo, I do actually, yeah. He's a lot of fun. Massive dick though. But
Yeah. Since we started this podcast, we got a cat. So I didn't have a cat when we did the first episode of this, and I do have one now. And like, I get it now. Like, I didn't get all this stuff about Grebo and cats and that the cat metaphor that we already talked about. Like, that would have gone over my head. And now I get it. I'm like, yep, cats are dicks. Cats don't care if you're a good person as long as you're nice to the cat. But I always love, same as you, I always love Grebo. And Nanny and Grebo's relationship is beautiful, obviously.
call the cat a bastard.
And I'd forgotten actually, because like I always feel like Grebo's like a bit of a comic relief kind of character, and I forgot that there's actually like significant plot point. Like Grebo moves the plot of this book, which is nice.
Yes, Berens traps him in the cell, and this leads to the witches' showdown. There's a really great scene before this happens, where Nanny Ogg and Granny Weatherwax have a massive blazing row.
Yeah,
And
yeah.
that felt incredibly real to me as well.
Do you know what it reminded me of? I don't know. Hopefully, this isn't too much of a spoiler, or I don't even know. This isn't a reference I've run by you previously or anything. Happy Valley, the BBC crime drama. Yeah.
Oh, I've not seen that one.
Oh man, so Sally Wainwright, so this drama, and main character is a police sergeant, female police sergeant, and she's like in her late 50s, early 60s, and she's got a sister, and they have Rye. They're the Rye in this. Just reminded me of this Rye in this like contemporary British drama, and you're just like, that's how real it feels, by one of our like greatest living TV writers. To the extent actually that I guess maybe just because Happy Valley's playing on my mind because it's just been on telly, but like the way Granny speaks in this book, it's got a real, like I hear it in a Yorkshire accent now. Like a lot of the vernacular, there's like really subtle vernacular that's there, just like the word choice and the word order. I can hear Sarah Lancashire saying it in a Yorkshire accent now. And it's just like brought a whole extra level of depth to it, which is lovely. So yeah, so that fight, when I'm hearing that fight or between Granny and Nanny, I'm thinking it's the two sisters in Happy Valley, and it just feels, like you said, it just feels so real. Yeah. Check it out, by the way. It's a great series. Absolutely, check it out. Cool. Oh yeah, I don't know what your edit point on this is going to be, but also like that you've paid special attention to the fool's Shakespearean vernacular in your notes as well. I remember something that really annoyed me at the time, because I was like I was reading these books for fun, like, you know, when you're in school and you have to read Shakespeare, like you're forced to read Shakespeare, and you like sit down to read Discworld in your free time, and it's full of like, marry, nuncle, prithee. This is unfair. I don't get the impression that you warmed all that much to it either.
No, I like the Fool as a character, but the Shakespearean stuff really threw me. So, nuncle, mine uncle. Marry is like well or deed, or sometimes listen.
The gestures are good
Prithee,
here. If you're not watching the video, you're missing out.
there's gesticulations, interjections, invocations. Prithee should have been an obvious one. Pray thee, ask you.
Oh yeah, okay.
Sirrah, this is actually the social reverse of sir, to address inferiors, sometimes expressing contempt.
Huh.
So that's a really odd one, with the full calling Thelma Sirrah.
That was a new one. I mean, and it does that, as you say, that sort of changes the tone of some of the conversations. But I know that you know this as well anyway, but like, but the fool played like a really specific role in court, I guess, in those days, in the Shakespeare times, because he was like the only person who could kind of speak down to the Lord, I guess. Isn't that right?
Yeah, I got some great stuff from the Discord wiki on this. The piece I just read about the Shakespearean fool, and also that you could not speak to a monarch in terms like we might speak of Boris Johnson or Rishi Sunak. So it was the fool's role to put across those opinions, so that the monarch got a balanced view, and just hope that they didn't do it in a way that led to being killed or tortured, which was the way that anybody else who tried to put across those views ended up.
Yeah.
So that kind of the conscience.
Yeah, it's a bizarre, like you gotta wonder how that kind of mechanism came into place.
It's
It's an
a
interesting one.
strange one, yeah. So we've got to talk, of course, about the final confrontation as it felt when I was reading it with
Hmm.
between the witches and the Felmets. Did you dig it? Do you remember the first time you read that? Did you dig it this time around?
Uh, hmm. Yes, as I say, I remember when I was on this read and I got to it and I was like, God, this feels really close to the end of the story. Um, and I'm trying to think back to the first time I read it. Obviously, this time I was reading it on the old tablet. The first time I read it, I would have been reading the same version that you read, so I would have been aware that I was in the middle of a book, I guess. And how the likes of the Falmouths would have been perceived by me reading this in like the late 90s, early 2000s, were like that kind of, I wouldn't have been drawn the same kind of comparisons. I wouldn't have been as cynical, in terms of like how governments operate, how people in power operate. Like my real world experience of that would have been much less. So yeah, I think it would have come as a lot more of a surprise. I think that they were able to get the best of the witches early in the book, and that they were like, I'm really interested in and entranced by the whole kind of idea of propaganda and of storytelling and how stories become truth. Whereas I think that would have been a lot of that probably would have gone over my head back in the day. So yeah, I think that these human interactions between the witches and the Felmets and the genuine political power struggle is a lot more interesting to me than any kind of like mage wars, like sorcerers
Yeah,
destroying the world or whatever like that. This is kind of where it's at for me, more so now even than back in the day, definitely.
up close and personal. I think here is where we get Duke Felmet at his most dangerous scene. After this, he is kind of so far over the edge that he's kind of useless. And it's I don't mean that as an attack on Sir Pratchett's writing. I think it's entirely intentional. I think it's entirely works.
Yeah, because
The
you've got the Duchess
madness.
there anyway. Yeah,
Yeah.
it's not, the threat isn't any less because it's really the Duchess pulling the strings anyway. So yeah, but I agree. And Nanny in the torture chamber, you're like, it's great. It's actually really deftly handled because like you have all the comedy and like of Nanny not being scared and like that she's right not to be scared of the
What's
Duke.
that one? What's that one?
Yeah, but at the back of your mind, you're thinking like the Duchess could go through with this. So like Nanny might actually be overplaying her hand here a little bit because the Duke isn't anything really to worry about, but behind him there is somebody who might go through and put an end to one of these witches, which is, and considering, and that's something that he is thinking about because of how the book ends, because it's her comeuppance that draws a final line under the events of this story. So yeah, I found that really interesting, really well handled. Yeah, great sequence.
During the attempt to break out Nanny Og, Magrat turns a door into a tree, into a living tree, which is the return of our popular segment Tree Time, because we've seen, I think it's book 3 or 4 where we've got trees playing with
I feel
uh
like you're loosening the rules here slightly. I'm going to allow it because I missed tree time.
well,
I do
I've
miss
I've
it.
got I've got so the various examples of winter portents and omens include trees walking, which resonate with Macbeth Act 5, Scene 3, and Birnam Wood coming to Dunsean, moving
I'm going to
against the
put my feet
king.
up here.
Reinforced as Granny comments, the forest was a thing in itself, alive. All trees were one tree. And there's Gaia theory, and we talked about the quaking aspens, and we've also got references to Black Alice, a reference to Black Alice or Black Agnes or Black Anna, who lives in a Leicester cave with a great oak by the entrance and does hang children and lambs on trees. So I did a bit of research
Mm.
into the walking palm.
Ooh. The thing I miss about tree time is I get to like put my feet up and drink and just
Put your
listen
feet up.
and learn along with everybody else. So take it away.
So the walking palm is genus Socratea exoriza, or let's just say Cachapona. It's a palm native to the rainforests, tropical Central and South America. It can grow up to 25 meters in height with a stem diameter of up to 16 centimeters. Hold on to that bit. Cachapona has a higher root system, unusual stilt roots, growing a few feet off the ground from the base of the tree. So they look less like trees and look like upright walking brooms. The function of these roots are some debate.
I'm Googling it as we speak, by the way.
The Cachapona, some believe that the roots allow the tree to be more stable in swampy areas. Others suggest that the stilt roots allow the palm to grow taller to reach light without having to increase the diameter of the stem, thus investing in less biomass in underground roots than other palms. The radical theory is that the Cachapona uses its roots to walk from the shade. If another tree falls on the seedling palm, or there are obstacles that are major hazards, it can move away. Some say the process takes several years. Studies of the Cachapona are dominated by a battle between two academics, Peter Veransky and Geraldo Avalos. So Veransky, Earth Science Institute of the Slovak Academy, paleobiologist, suggests a tree moves 2 or 3 centimeters per day. He claims to have seen this phenomenon firsthand.
You've been drinking too much absinthe.
So I thought I'd go with direct quotes from both these people. As the soil erodes, the tree grows new, long roots that find new and more solid ground, sometimes up to 20 meters. Then slowly, as the roots settle in the new soil and the tree bends patiently towards the new roots, the old roots slowly lift into the air. The whole process for the tree to relocate to a new place with better sunlight and more solid ground can take a couple of years. He's opposed in that by Geraldo Avalos, director of the Center for Sustainable Development Studies in Atenas, Costa Rica. He's a biologist, so another respected name. He claims the trunk remains rooted to the spot. He says, thinking that a palm tree can actually track canopy light changes by moving slowly over the forest floor is a myth that tourist guides find amusing to tell visitors to the rainforest. And Avalos is claimed by livescience.com to be one of the world's top experts on this palm.
I mean, you want to believe the walking guy, don't you? And that's part of the power of
Yeah.
stories. That's so key to this book. Like, I want to believe that they walk. I want to believe that. I'm looking at the pictures. I'm going to look at the pictures.
We're going to put a few up on Spotify and YouTube.
Yeah, especially when the roots are younger, like before they've kind of mossed over and that. Like, it's quite Lovecraftian. Like, it's you can see, you can picture this thing like walking across the forest.
Truly stunning.
But yeah, that was a great tree time. It's my favorite tree time yet.
Thank you. I think I side with the fact that these do actually move. I went back and forward. I mean, the pull is to believe that they don't move because that's more sciencey. But I think we're being shown something new here.
It's a better story, and again, it's the key theme of this book that I relate to so much more now than I did the first time I read it. Where it's like, you want to believe the thing that the story that appeals to you the most, but like why certain stories appeal more than others is in itself quite fascinating, and it's wrong to call it science because there hasn't really been enough research done on it, in my opinion. Like, I just want to believe that. Like, I especially after I saw the pictures, if I had just listened to you talking about it, I think I would have been kind of 50-50. And then I saw the pictures and it's like, nah, that looks like it walks. And it just makes you realize immediately like how all these myths and legends start in the first place, like somebody 1,000 years ago walking through a forest sees a tree that looks like it's literally just stopped mid-step. You're like how can that not spark your imagination, So There will be no intermission. Nice. I'll read this one for you. Pages 120 to 155. In the aftermath of Nanny Ogg's release, Ference stows away in a stone and asks the witches to put his son to the throne. Duke Falmouth becomes increasingly paranoid and commissions the fool to manage a play. Angered, Granny leads the witches in taking the kingdom of Lancre 15 years into the future. I had completely forgotten about this. Whenever I was saying, we were reading going, how is this book's going to take like 20 years? I had completely forgotten about this sequence. And I knew when I was reading it, you were going to love it. I was like, this is some Doctor Who type shit right here.
Yeah.
So go on, talk about it.
So I kind of, I was in a little bit of disbelief as I was reading this. And part of my brain was wondering, right, or part of my brain was saying, the shark's being well and truly jumped here. And the other part of my brain was just saying, wow, this is really entertaining. I'm all in for this. And I think that part won out.
Yeah,
Just went with it.
I was quite the same. And I was thinking, first of all, like, it is a fun sequence to read, as you say. Like, she's flying, Granny's flying laps around Lancre. Like, have you referenced it? Superman 2, is it?
Yeah.
That's the reference that's in my head as well. And she's like getting refueled with magic and getting refueled with booze while she's doing it. And I was like, yeah, that's quite fun. And then I was like, well, as long as the whole kingdom goes, nobody really notices, and it's like, yeah, okay, I kind of get it. There's no cascading paradox that's created by it, and within the world of Lancre, like, that's okay. Like, nobody, and obviously, like, if you're the one question I had, and they come back to it later, like, he doesn't just leave this, at least he references it later on that it's kind of a bit nonsense. It's like, what if you tried to enter the kingdom during this 15 years from outside? Like, what would you have seen? You know, would it have just been like a big blurry wall? Like, what? You know, but other than that, it kind of worked for me. So yeah, I'm kind of with you on that. I was kind of thinking there might have been a bit more debate over this, but because I know you're a bit more of a connoisseur of the kind of time travel genre, but it's just a testament to Terry Pratchett. Like, he can win you over just with like a big audacious idea, like with handled well with a couple of, you know, really relatable characters and a kind of a fun set piece. As you say,
yeah, the actual scene's maybe only about 10 pages where we actually see how it's handled. There's a discussion of it and that, and it's kind of, here's a poser.
Go on.
Is it really morally unsound to make everybody age 15 years?
But they don't see, that's what was annoying me as well, because it got my head to wrap my head around. So everybody in the kingdom stays the same, and the world outside ages 15 years. So Tom John ages 15 years because he's not in Lancre. But like, Falmouth stays the same age, Nanny and Granny stay the same age, all Nanny's family stay the same age, everybody in the kingdom stays the same age. The whole kingdom jumps 15 years into the future. And then, so that's what it clicked for me as well, because I was like, yeah, everybody just ages. That's bullshit? And then I realized that they don't.
So why does Tom John age?
Because he's not in the kingdom. So he's out with his traveling players in Ankh-Morpork or in Stow Lat or somewhere like that, because he doesn't live in Lancre. That was the whole point of giving him to the actors, because they were going to leave the kingdom. So everybody in the kingdom stays the same age, but Tom John grows up, and that's the point of the spell, so that he can grow up and come back.
What about Well and Vitaller?
Yeah, so they all age too. Like, so Vitaller, when we meet Vitaller again, you know, when he's sending,
he's an old man.
Yeah, he's sending Tom John off on tour, essentially. He's not going because he's like 15 years older than the last time we saw him. He's like an old man, like you said. So it took me a minute to get my head around it, for sure. But once I kind of realized that that's kind of what was happening, I was sort of okay with it, because I felt initially the same way you did, where it's like everybody just becomes 15 years older. Like, Granny and Nanny are already kind of old, I thought. So yeah, once that kind of clicked for me, I was okay with it. It just made me realize that nobody from the outside could come in to Lancre for 15 years. But that gets kind of hand waved away in the end.
Do you know what's funny? In terms of critical cultural theory, we should absolutely, in literature, we should absolutely be having this discussion. But I already feel like we're overthinking it.
Perhaps. But that's kind of, I mean, that's the fun of
Yeah,
it. I mean,
that is.
nobody ever listened to a podcast about a book because they didn't want to overthink it. You know?
There's a really nice scene just before we get the time jump in the conclusion with the confrontation of Felmet, where he says something like, I think he says the title of the book. He says, "We're sisters."
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Settle with you. Um, Here in the build up to the time jump, we see him become more and more paranoid.
Mm.
There's a quote here: "The Duke had a mind ticked like a clock, and like a clock, it regularly went cuckoo."
It's a good one. Very Pratchett. Yeah.
And I really enjoyed this iteration of the Duke.
What I say that you've mentioned that the Duke's breakdown's a guilty pleasure of yours, and for me, definitely as well, more so this time around. Like the real subtle references to the fact that he's just like basically taking a cheese grater to his hand, and he's got like no hand left. So by this point in the story, he's like, at least he's working on some nubs here. Is like really well written because it's never explicitly described that his hand is like a bloody mess, but there's just like lots of like little hints at it. Like he points with what used to be a finger, like things like that, and you're like, fuck, this guy's fucking himself up. Like, and that's really unsettling. You know, I love it.
And his mind is just gone. He's kind of,
Well,
like
yeah,
we'll
you
see
take it
later
cheap.
in the book. He's given up. He's gone on vacation.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, yeah. But I mean, you can't take a cheese grater to your hand without being a little bit on the unstable side, shall we say? I thought, yeah, I find that as like a recurring motif for how off the deep end he is. I thought that was really, really creepy. Like, you know, and it's nice to have a little bit of that because like Macbeth and Hamlet are creepy plays. Like they're scary, but there's unsettling bits in them. They're creepy. So this is a funny book and it's riffing on those, but like to be able to maintain a bit of that texture to it, I think is really good. It's really well done.
Well, so let's go into the 15 years jump.
Page 156 to 206. Work on the disc is underway. Tom, John, and Whale drink at the Mended Drum. Can't believe I forgot about that. Wander into a bad mugging and get a new commission. Before leaving for Lancre, Tom John is bothered by dreams of witches and Whale's editing anxieties. Witches make sure Tom John reaches the castle by crystal ball and various directions. The show absolutely doesn't tell Magrat anything about how to sneak into the castle via the little gate around the back.
So we talked about while we were reading this, and you've got a lot of love for her. Well,
I do, yeah. Trying to avoid spoilers for later books again, but like,
ooh,
well, it's actually isn't the first time it's been mentioned in Discworld. Like the bolts of inspiration that are flying through the multiverse and like who they hit and when and what it means and stuff. So like, well, being hit by like the Three Stooges and Charlie Chaplin and stuff like that, really, really tickles me. And his appreciations for how story affects reality and how, and then in their world it's literal, but for us it's about how stories affect the cultural reality, I suppose. I'm endlessly fascinated by that stuff. There's a book that really like changed a lot of things for me in terms of how I approached my writing, called Into the Woods, by a writer called John York, who used to run the BBC Writers Academy. He like used to show run EastEnders, which like to most people probably sounds like not that impressive, but that's a really, really tough job. It's a huge volume of story that has to be told. And he wrote this book. It started off as a bit of an investigation into why we tell stories. And he realized that like nobody's really looked into that. It's just an accepted fact that we just do. And he found like a few, and the only real analysis he came across happened to be about Shakespeare. So that's why it was all kind of fizzing with me when I was reading this book again, you know. So yeah, as I say, I find that endlessly fascinating, and it's about reinforcing pattern recognition, because pattern recognition is an evolutionary trait for survival. And telling stories and reinforcing stories is a way of kind of hard coding pattern recognition into our brains, into our neurons, by constantly retelling the same stories. It literally, storytelling like changes how we think, and how we think in relation to other people. That's what society is. So storytelling changes society, and this book is all about that ultimately. And that is something obviously that went completely over my head when I was 12 or 13 years old. And it just makes me feel like a little bit warm and fuzzy inside now that like I'm not crazy for being obsessed with that stuff. And when I read it again, you know.
Wow.
So that's a lot. I promise. I was like, I was like, I'll really try not to go off about that, but I've done it now. It's over.
So yeah, we've got a bit in the script that we got from the wiki. The overall theme, Wyrd sisters, concerns the effect words can have on reality.
Yeah.
This idea is explicitly stated by the fool, who says that the past is what people remember, and memories are words. Who knows how a king behaved 1,000 years ago? There is only recollection and stories. Duke and Lady film it. They commission a play to serve propaganda, portraying the witches of Lancre and the former king as evil and the Duke as virtuous. So stories are our way of kind of mapping out our visibility, if you like, or our direction.
Yeah. So I mean, if you want to take, I have
It
to stop.
sounded very convincing the way you said it.
Yeah, and I'm just paraphrasing. I mean, I'm stealing it all from John York. He's like, you know, much more accomplished in all things and all than I am. But like, yeah, the idea essentially that like, if cavemen were getting eaten by saber-toothed tigers, and if the saber-toothed tigers were only, if you could tell the approach of a tiger because say all the birds stopped chirping or something like that, then that would become a story. You know, that like the deadly silence or something like that. You know, and then this is made up, but that, you know, drawing connections between things that aren't necessarily connected, but as I say, it's about the recognition of a pattern. That's the building block of the story. So yeah, the fact that then that becomes history and that becomes kind of cultural memory and stuff like that is really, really fascinating. And I think this weaponized version of it that the Fool is talking about here, in terms of like making a political figure more loved, that's just like that's where we're at now, you know, however many, 30 years after this book was written, like we're in like the zenith of that. Pretty well, you hope it's the zenith of it. At least it can't get any worse.
I mean, maybe this is why mainstream history is so negative. It's not just that, it's not so much maybe that the victor is the one telling the story. The story itself is a warning. It's a cautionary tale. It's how to spot a predator.
Yeah,
And
perhaps. Yeah, I think there's what we kind of see is the conflict between those two things, where it's like that the original purpose of the stories, which, as you say, was to allow for our survival, but then that's been corrupted by what we see in this book, which is that people in power using those stories to their own ends. And there's a conflict at the heart of that, and it's just actually really beautifully illustrated in this book, where like Well knows that he's written something wrong. Like he knows that he's written a lie when he
it's
writes.
instinctual, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah. So that I just like I can't. I'm genuinely stunned by like the depths that it goes to in this book, because I had no recollection of it, but it's just like something that I really, really relate to now, and that's where that the initial question that you asked me like 100 years ago about why I relate with like that's kind of where that comes from. And like, yeah, the idea that he's written something untruthful and that upsets him, like that's the sort of thing that keeps me up at night, you know.
And there's so much achieved in these 50 pages, because this sets us up to sort of a reboot within our geography of the story. Hoel and Tom John are our new central characters, and it's got to do all that. And I mean, this is also the main bridge towards the big finale. Hoel speaks to me as a fellow writer. I think there's, or I certainly experience like a fraternity when I meet fellow writers. I sort of raise my optimism and sort of want so much more to get on with them, and I'm more willful to do so.
Yes, absolutely, I'm with you on that. And it's actually it's great to be, you know, for example, on this podcast with you, and I'm part of this BBC writers room writers group at the moment, and we've been having little Zoom meetings and little kind of group therapy sessions
Really?
together. Almost feels that way sometimes. It's necessary, I think, you know, when we talked about like the stress of going into this line of work or taking on any kind of creative work, that might be part of Terry's kind of motivation for writing this. I think like having that support network is really key. So like when you see those characters on the page that you identify with. I know I mentioned writing about writing, kind of, it's hard to pull off because like it's just inherently navel gazy. Like it's the best writing should be outward looking, but if you nail it, then this is the effect that it will have. And like and Terry definitely nails it. And Well's a great, hesitate to say hell, Well's a great character actually, because I know that this is a character that just pushes a lot of my specific buttons, and you're a writer too, so I know he's going to push a lot of your specific buttons. So there's maybe people who aren't writers who read this book and feel differently about it, but in terms of like portrayal of like how it feels to be a writer and how it feels to be creative, it's almost unparalleled, I would say.
It's right there. It's right there. Myself, I've been doing a course, The Artist's Way by Julia Cameron. It's an exercise book that you work out over 12 weeks. It's quite intensive. It's almost like a university module level. And one of the main things that you do is the morning pages, where you wake up every morning and you write 3 pages of whatever. It could be drivel, it could be just inward navel gazing. And what I have found is that it constantly turns up inspired poetry, short stories, really playfulness. And I've actually found a lot of Pratchett flavors seeping into my writing since since we started this, or since I started the morning pages.
Yeah.
So that's another Howell kind of note. And
Yeah,
I love stories about stories as well. It maybe it isn't. I don't know why. I think it probably is a thing shared by non-writers.
oh yeah, I'd be interested to see if anybody wants to write in about that. I would be interested in a bit of an outside perspective on that. But I think objectively, I'm aware that it is done well in this instance. So I would expect people to respond to these sequences regardless of whether they're kind of into the writing side of things or not. And as I say, I love those little round world pop culture references. To the likes of the Three Stooges and Charlie Chaplin and stuff like that kind of sneak their way in.
Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I feel like because I callously forgot about it earlier, that the mended drum and its reappearance deserves at least a passing mention.
Book.
Yeah, and like, you know, just the reality, I guess, the sense of Discworld as a tangible place coming together. And I guess in a weird way, like, I thought the fact that the rest of the disc has progressed 15 years, like the librarian is 15 years older now, in theory. Rincewind is 15 years older, in theory, right? Because
Are you sure?
yeah, because the Lankers moved 15 years into the future. If Tom John is in Agmore Park for 15 years, everybody else in Agmore Park and the rest of the disc, except for Lanker, has aged 15 years during the course of this book. But I don't know. I mean, orangutans probably lived to be fucking whatever, like old.
Garam, you coin. This is all your fault.
Indeed. I mean, we never really got to the bottom of how that all got reset anyway, so I mean, it's fine. It's totally fine. So yes, by all means,
Let's talk about Tom John, because this is
Yes.
Tom John's. Like last time we saw him, he was like 3 years old. Yeah, he's a likable enough character. He feels quite well realized. He's got ambitions and inspirations of his own, separate from his father. He's got a good relationship with Well, and I think kind of knows what he wants and what he doesn't want.
Yeah, I find it quite interesting. So obviously, since the last time I read this book, I spent a lot of time around actors, and there's like actors who have it and actors who don't, and that sounds like a really obvious thing to say and a redundant thing to say, but like it's really true. So like the likes of Tom John, like actors who know, or actors who maybe they don't even know, but actors who just are good, right? They're not the ones who have like diva drops. They're not the ones who have entourages. They're the ones who just like show up, do the work, are really nice to everybody. Will have a cup of tea and a chat because they're secure in what they do and they love what they do. And I think like Tom John's like that kind of actor, because I guess the kind of underlying thing in all his scenes is that he's like a genuinely brilliant actor, like a supernaturally good actor. And anytime, I would say I could count on one hand for sure the amount of actors I've met who are anywhere near that good. They've all been lovely people. You know, they're not like doing all the like messed up method acting stuff that you read about on the internet, or like
He's
what
just
is
a
called.
good lad and he's a professional lad.
Exactly. I was going to call out some Hollywood actors there to see if I could get her some buzz, but maybe I won't. But yeah, and I think because those are the kind of stories that make press in the real world, like you kind of forget that there's just like a bunch of people out there who are just like doing the work and doing it really well, and they tend to be, in my experience, limited experience, tend to be good people. So I like that in Tom John. You know, he's not like this like crazy diva or whatever.
There's a lot of Shakespeare in here.
Go for it.
Um,
Get into it.
there's we've got divers alarums was a thing that what that was another
I meant to
thing.
look that up actually. Is that Macbeth or?
It's just alarums is a stage direction
Yeah.
indicating a battle is about to take place, and divers is a variation on the word diverse. So
Oh,
various warnings.
of course. I should have known
Um,
that.
we've got
I levels were a long time ago now.
we've got a lot of Macbeth stuff. When shall we three meet again? Being the first line of both books in terms of
Oh,
dialogue.
of course. Yeah.
The dagger of the mind, out damned spot, as Felmet attempts to wash the blood from his hands. I Banquo in Act 2, Scene 1, I dreamt last night of the three Wyrd sisters.
Oh yeah.
Saw you, the Wyrd sisters. One of Wales script, please yourself, is I think is a line from As You Like It,
There you go. Yeah.
and All the
Makes
World's
sense.
a Stage. King Lear is the royalty in that, descending into madness in the company of his fool,
Of
which
course.
we
Yeah.
see all through. According to the Discworld Wikia, there's also motifs or references to Julius Caesar, Midsummer Night's Dream, Twelfth Night, Richard III, Henry V, especially the St. Crispin's Day speech, and A Tempest.
Tempest, I guess. Yeah, that makes sense. The rest of them would be deep cuts for me, I guess. Well, Midsummer's Night Dream, I'd be relatively familiar with. I can't think of any direct lifts from it. The
Well,
rest of them wouldn't be.
all I could come up with was the Neil Gaiman version, which has the fairies crossed into the play, and we're about to get the witches taking the part of the witches in the play.
Oh,
I
I gotta stop. There's
got
that comes back, but oh gosh.
I've got Shakespeare, Gaiman, Pratchett, Wibbly Wobbly going on.
Yeah, but you should, and like it won't be the last time you'll have the opportunity to talk about that. I'll say no more. Uh, yeah, there's a lot of Shakespeare going on here. You've got the full volume sitting there with you, and I think even just from reading this short section that you've put in the notes and from what you've just said, I'm like, I've got about half of it, maybe. I think at the most in terms of the references, and like yeah, A level in English literature, right? Like I've got a degree in English and film studies, and this is like I'm getting half the references in this book, maybe. So fair play. Like I mean, he is the master at this to this day. Like researching for this podcast, talking to you, spending time on the Discworld subreddit, like the new references are just coming to light all the time, and it's such a joy because it just means that like I'm never done reading the books in that sense because I'm always discovering new things about them, and that's quite beautiful and quite comforting, I think, in a lot of ways.
Hello to the Discworld Reddit community. I would love to join you someday.
Please do.
If that be.
It's been a while since I plugged the podcast on there. Maybe I should do it for this one. I'm gonna make a big fuss when we get the guards because it's one of my favorites. So I'm just kind of saving it up for that. Oh, and then before we move on, we have to mention the Disc Theatre, just an obvious reference.
To the Globe Theatre in London.
And I was trying to think, and hopefully this isn't a spoiler, and apologies if it is. I was trying to think if the disc ever gets referenced again, because obviously there's a lot of books set in Agmore Park. Nothing jumped immediately to mind, and then I was thinking about the Globe. Didn't the Globe get burned down?
Yeah, reconstructed, maybe twice.
Yeah, so maybe that has something to do with it. So just in case I end up spoiling anything.
You've already dropped it. We see Hoel again, so maybe we see the disc again too.
Sorry if that. I don't want to either confirm or deny that.
Okay. Right. So
it's such a tightrope. It's such a tightrope. Yeah, you read this one.
206 to 252. The play's a thing. The performance smears the witches. They take on the part of three actors, and with some headology, force a final confrontation with Duke and Lady Falmouth, death returns. Tom John refuses a crown, and in recognizing physical similarities with the fool, he takes a crown as King Verence II. A lot of heckling in this section.
A lot of what?
A lot of heckling.
Oh, heckling, yes.
Yeah. And that, in fact, Granny Weatherwax has been doing quite a bit of theatre heckling all through the book,
Yeah.
and it's always a joy.
Indeed, and that's part of what the connective tissue, I think, like that feels like the Granny Weatherwax of equal rights, who just like, you know, newfangled inventions like theatre, just like she does not have any time for it whatsoever. Yeah.
Over her headology. Yeah.
Indeed, yeah. When this coalesces, because I think you've probably noticed and listeners have probably realized that like when we get to this stage of the previous books is where I have tended to kind of get a little bit lukewarm on the stories, whereas this is a nailed on ending for me. This feels like a proper Discworld story coming together, sticking the landing. There's no interdimensional wasp names. It's just all about all the characters that we've met and spent time with the whole way through the book, all coming together in like a really satisfying conclusion. And it's a big part of why this one feels like the one in terms of like moving forward into like the Discworld series proper.
I broadly agree with you on this one. We've seen the storm appear several times through the book, and never really kind of amounts to much. Just goes out and does its own thing, and that's it's kind of not really a problem. This feels it's quite natural. So, I mean, the concept of a play within a play is called a mise en abîme, which means placed into abyss. It's common in Shakespeare's works. I don't know if there's much of a thing where like the characters watching a play will cross over into the play and occupy the space of their fictional counterparts.
I'm trying to think. So of those ones referenced, Midsummer's Night Dream and Hamlet would be the two I'd be the most familiar with, but I think we're definitely in new territory in this book, yeah, in terms of having the witches actually that mistaken identity thing and the witches ending up on stage. Like it does feel quite Shakespearean, but I can't think of a specific instance of something like that happening in a Shakespeare play. And I love the actors, the callback to the actors who just like get forgotten about. They just get left in the dungeon.
Yeah. I looked back and forward across the book and I could not find a title for the play.
Oh yeah, that's a good point actually.
Interesting. It seems to be quite there's
but you know why that might be? You're not meant to say the title of Macbeth.
Yeah, we talked a bit about this.
I hadn't even thought of that until just there now. That's almost like we planned that. Yeah. So you know you can't. You have to call it the Lanker play. Otherwise, something will fall. Otherwise, you'll get locked in a dungeon forever, like the guys who played the witches.
In terms of how it plays out, it's a bit sort of dull and messy until the point where the sisters take up their roles and they kind of upstage the other performers. I mean, a lot of that's their doing and the headology and Duke Falmouth's craziness. It's kind of the wheels are coming off it, but the minute they step on stage and kind of outstage everyone else and then put their own narrative into place, it's quite electric. And then
agreed.
To cap it off, we have Death shows up in front of the actor playing Death.
Yeah, there's obviously
Cherry.
There is a bit of a love of performance here, and I would be interested to know what Terry's background is in that, because like this idea of Death, and like we spent a whole book with Death, and he's like thinking about that confrontation with Mort, where he's like a really scary, like he's the bad guy in one of the previous Discworld books, and in this book he has stage fright. And like as I was just saying about like the men, the drum, like that interconnectedness, and obviously if you haven't read Mort, that's fine, like you're aware of Death as a character, as a concept, and that's still funny. But like if you have spent time with him in the previous books and you read this, like it's more, it's better, it's deeper. So I love that scene, absolutely. I agree with you that it's a little bit slow to start, and I think because this is like Terry's first finale that isn't like interdimensional what's names in some shape or form, or like the shape of it does get there, like, but it's a little bit slow to form. And definitely when death gets there, that's great. When the witches get out on stage, I agree with you. That's when it really starts to click. I love the stabbing. We're filming
Oh
it,
yes.
and then he puts a sheet over his head and pretends it's being ghost.
And
Like,
it like what I was criticizing a moment ago was the play within the
okay,
book.
yes, yeah, but we don't need it. Yeah, we dwell on it perhaps more than we need to. I think.
And the stabbing entirely works off that for a moment. It's you think it's real, these people are going down, and then of course it's a
Yeah,
play, it's props. Of course it is.
and
Uh,
I'll confess, like, what about we're on book 6? I'll confess that on rereading the books or with sorcery reading for the first time, like I hadn't laughed out loud, like hadn't had a big belly laugh laughing out loud yet, until we got to the the Jake with the sheet over his head, and that got a laugh out of me in the bath last night. So we're definitely, we're on the right track here. We're going from strength to strength. It's a great sequence. It's a great ending, and endings are so important. In this book about story, like when you stick the ending, like that's what people remember. So I think the endings have been a little bit weak up till now, and that's been holding things back. But he's cracked it, so now we're off to the races.
I think actually the one that came closest for me before this was the end to Wyrd Sisters, which was just a lot of bad weather.
Oh,
So maybe there's something happening around Granny Weatherwax where the big climax is going to be a lot more localized phenomenon.
Oh, you mean
So,
equal rights? Yeah, yes, true. Actually, and maybe just having Granny at the center of things. That's just like, because she's so no nonsense and she's so human. Like that's a big help, perhaps.
and just while it's come up, this is the first book we haven't seen Unseen University in. So
Yeah, that'd probably be right. Yes,
that's
it is right, indeed. Yeah, and we had the opportunity. We were in Ankh-Morpork, Park, so yeah, it's an interesting one. And they must have known. The Wizards must have realized something was up with that 15-year time jump. Or maybe they're still fixing everything after sorcery, which was only 6 months ago, apparently. 15 years and 6 months ago, depending on. Oh, it's giving me a headache.
So, did you have a favorite quote?
I had. Let me check my bookmarks.
Well, I go with mine first. So,
But
nature showing up at Granny's cottage was definitely my favorite scene. My favorite quote: Granny Weatherwax was often angry. She considered it one of her strong points. Genuine anger is one of the world's great creative forces, but you had to learn how to control it. That didn't mean you let it trickle away. It meant you damned it carefully. Let it develop a working head. Let it drown whole valleys of the mind. And then, just when the whole structure was about to collapse, opened a tiny pipeline at the base and let the iron-hard steam of wrath power the turbines of revenge.
that's, yeah.
Oh,
Oof.
formidable, eh?
Indeed, and that's like we've known that Granny's a formidable character. Oh, my Kindle app just crashed. Oh, come on. Yeah, but like to so eloquently describe it, and at such a perfect moment, because it's like the closest Granny's ever come to being defeated.
Yeah.
And then to get that description of her to tee up what's coming next is awesome.
One of the things Julia Cameron talks about in her book, The Artist's Way, is that anger is an energy and you should find a way to channel it correctly and let it enliven your writing and
Oh, that's interesting.
not break pencils or that sort of thing.
Put it on the page. We might get an appearance of the cat here, is what I'm being told. So yeah, I don't know. You might view it. Depends how good the video quality is. It's usually quite bad. But I do have a black cat now. So if you thought the absinthe was a good prop, this is Bibbs. He's my black cat. Apparently he's going a bit crazy. I've just been informed. Sorry, all that was by way of stalling to a good quote. It has to be Nanny, because this is our first real introduction to Nanny, and like the idea of the vivacious drunken witch will always be, it's what kind of sustains me through these witches books, or did originally when I first read them. So for me, it's "Where's Nanny?" she said. "She's lying out on the lawn," said Granny. She felt a bit pearly, and from outside came the sound of Nanny Og being pearly at the top of her voice. So just Nanny on a bender, and I think she goes on a bender like at least three separate occasions in the book, which is great. So yeah,
So,
she's such a favorite of mine.
had you a favorite scene in this? It's hard choice in it.
It is a hard choice, yeah, and I think you probably picked the plum, the plum candidate in the scene where the kingdom comes to Granny. I like the payoff for that as well, and it's a bit of a cop out maybe to say, but like the Duchess gets away, and you think that she's maybe going to live to connive another day, and then the kingdom basically like leads her into a trap, and you know that she's going to basically get eaten by the kingdom, but she charges into battle against them. It's like she like pulls a knife on the kingdom, and like that's the end, and that yeah, for a character that didn't get huge amount of page time in terms of like we know that she's technically the antagonist and that Falmouth's office rocker and that she's kind of the puppet master. Like she doesn't get that much. We don't spend that much time with her, but like to give her that ending and for that to be the real ending was like I can just visualize it so well. So I love that. But yeah, every time Nanny gets drunk, it definitely counts for me as well. For having her singing. I would still to this day, I don't know if anybody has figured it out or if it was ever mentioned on the old message boards back in the day. Maybe somebody can write in to tell us if the Hedgehog song, if we ever got full lyrics for the Hedgehog song, I would be interested in that. Every time it rears its head in this book, I always crack a smile. So yeah, that and the argument between Granny, this is a tough one. It's really, really hard. It is hard. Yeah.
Let's just say all of them.
I will. If I have to pick one for being strict, I'll say the last scene. So that, yeah, because then I don't have to pick a specific witch to give kind of preference to. So that scene between the kingdom and the Duchess, I think I'll go with that.
The Josh Kirby cover, I thought it was pretty good this time. There's so many elements layered into it. It gives us a cast as a proper ensemble. Unfortunately, it's let down by how badly considered it is for the needs of the paperback formatting, the title, spine, and back cover captions.
Yeah, I mean, like we've discussed before, I suppose that he just does whatever he wants anyway. Yeah, so it's the same artwork on the original audiobook, I guess, the Tony Robinson audiobook. So at least the front of it, you can see a little bit more of the front, like the fool isn't as badly hidden by the spine. Yeah, it's an improvement. I like the ghost on it. I don't know if I ever really thought about it. It's kind of a creepy, King Varence takes surprising center stage, doesn't he?
Mm.
And the dagger is really center stage on it, from what I'm looking at here.
I did forget to mention that I had listened to the BBC Radio Collection version.
Oh yeah?
I listened to that first, and I'll tell you why in a couple of minutes. Obviously, it's only 112 minutes, so there's a lot of detail. But what's quite interesting is it eschews almost all the description. I think there's a little bit at the start, and then it's dialogue only for at least 100 minutes. Sheila Hancock plays Granny Weatherwax, which is quite fun.
Oh yeah.
I think it's one I'll go back and listen to. We were looking at the other book covers.
Yeah, I feel like we were just kind of at the end of every episode, we just kind of dunk on the Kirby cover, so it's it's good to mix it up a little bit.
Yeah.
Have you got a favorite?
I like the three minimalist covers, the more modern stuff. We have to look into the illustrators, but they're the same three illustrators that have been producing work for all the books so far. We had a bit of a discussion before we came on about the modern stuff and kind of not so hot on it.
Sir, I can't remember what they're calling it, but it's like the new kind of hardback, the prestige editions in my head. I know their specific name for the collection. And the covers are they're like wood cuttings kind of. I like that. That's pretty good. It's just the three witches around the cauldron. It's yellow, green, and pink. And it's, like you said, it's quite minimalist. The title's really small. It's in the middle. It's like written around the moon. I like that a lot. Whereas the slightly more modern one, which feels like a bit more generic fantasy font for the author, for the title, and it's just shades of green, so it's like green and maybe a little yellow. It doesn't work quite as well for me. It feels a lot more generic. Another one that I'll just quickly mention that I do have a weird soft spot for is the American edition, because I have an uncorrected proof of snuff in this style, and the picture that's probably going to flash up that Andy will deftly edit into the cut probably doesn't do it justice. It looks a bit flat, and the broomsticks down the spine are a bit weird, but like they're like large format softbacks. So they feel it. Yeah, they have a good feel. I'll dig out my copy of the it's Going Postal actually that I have in this format, and as I say, they're surprisingly nice. There's something a bit like they're not trying that hard. Like the cover, it's just like three hats and a cauldron. And it's purple and green and black, feels witchy. So yeah, I kind of like that. The rest of them all just feel like variations on a theme to me personally, but.
Just last night, we had a bit of a chat with Garen Ewing on Twitter over his. So Garen is a British cartoonist. I think of him very much as sort of a British Hergé, very much in that style. He produced a Rainbow Orchid, I think is his best known work. And Garen created a cover art for when Stephen Briggs adapted Wyrd Sisters into a play. And that's a whole other podcast in itself.
Oof, indeed.
Actually, I just remembered Garen has also done a adaptation of The Tempest.
Yeah, his poster like beats all the covers, all the book covers, I think, personally. Like he captures the personality of the three protagonists in a way that literally none of the book covers do. I think. I don't know. I mean, that's high praise, obviously, but I think it's justified.
Spot on. I have a big thank you to make tonight. I mentioned that I had to listen to the audio version. That's because my brother, who gave me this big bag of Pratchett stuff, did not have Wyrd Sisters in it.
Oh.
So at a late stage, I called up Stack's Bookshop in Dundonald.
Oh yeah, there it is.
Asked if they had a copy of Wyrd Sisters. They had a great Pratchett section. They kept that for me. I arrived out at the shop. I happened to mention I was doing a podcast, and without much inquiry as to what it was, I got furnished with a free copy of Wyrd Sisters. So thanks very much to Sparky at Stack's in Dundalk. And they've got a Bangor County Down store as well. I'll definitely be back there for all of my Discworld holds.
Oh wow, it's great. It's our first official sponsorship.
First official sponsor. Yeah. Thank you.
All right, you random French absinthe guys, you can get out of here. We've got Stack's Bookshop on our side. Awesome. Yeah. That's great. It's great. It's great that it's local. It's great to shop local for that stuff, obviously. So awesome. Yeah, I'll definitely check them out. I'll be out in Bangor the odd time, so I'll maybe check that one out.
I think they really are. I certainly have them up there with Keats and Chapman as one of the best bookstores in Belfast.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, and shout out to Keats and Chapman as well. It's a great shop.
With plenty of Discworld stuff.
It is like talking about especially this, since we've done a slightly deeper dive into the covers this time. It has kind of made me want to start gathering hard copies again, but I'm gonna try and resist for now.
If you can hear a strange sound, PJ's cat Bibbs is thoroughly digging at the door like a trapped grebo.
Yeah, I might have to let him out, otherwise it's gonna get a bit grebo in here. So bear with me. Are you going or what?
Goodbye, Podcat.
Yeah, he's actually done a number on my carpet there. That's great.
We'd right. Best wrap this up soon then.
Going postal.
Going postal. Great shout out to Elizabeth and Ben of the Pratchett podcast, who've been really like tooting the horn for us since day one.
Yeah, thanks guys.
So, I've been doing some extra work on social media and linked a few posts to do with sorcery, one to the Samaritans, and he gave us a thank you for doing that, and one to the Open University, which does dozens of free courses. We got a witty reply from Zinc Stoat.
Sadly, nothing in inadvisably applied magic or cruel and unusual geography, but plenty to choose from nonetheless. I like it. Yeah, fair play. My dad was a is an alumni of the Open University. He always spoke very highly of it.
We asked on
Yes.
Twitter who's reading along with their book club and got a reply from Connor at C0N0R McCC.
When I was younger, I read the books in random order and missed a fair few. I planned to read along with the books that I missed, but life got in the way. I didn't get round to reading Sorcery. But halfway through Weird Sisters now, though. That's fair, Connor. Yeah, Connor's an old school friend of mine. I'm aware that he's got a young family, so I totally get it. My reading time has certainly diminished. But
send us an update though, Connor.
Yes, definitely do, man. Definitely do. Do you want to tell everybody where to contact us?
You can find us. Our email address is iveneverreaddiscworld at gmail.com. We're all over Amazon, Apple, Castbox, Google Casts, Pocket Cast, Radio Public, Spotify, Stitcher, Audible, and probably a few other hand directions. But
well done.
Primarily, you can listen to us on the web at YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter using @Discworld GNU.
Certainly, in terms of, like, I would be probably most active on Twitter. If you tag that or me at PJ Hart 86 on Twitter, you'll usually get some kind of response within 24 hours or so, because I can't go that long without procrastinating, obviously.
And I really have been meaning to plug my Patreon for some time now.
Oh, yeah.
So I keep 100% of the profits. None goes to the orphans of Ankmore Park. But for like $1 a month, share with you early episodes of this podcast, my other podcasts, comics, poetry, art. I work really hard at least 6 posts a month. And I've kind of made it all in, starting at $1. You pretty much get everything, including birthday cards and Christmas cards in print. So that's
for $1,
my pitch. $1.
That's a bargain right there.
Chocolate muffins.
Chocolate.
No, you don't actually get that was a metaphor.
I was gonna say, I was like, dude, you're definitely making a loss on that in this economy. All right, this is getting, yeah, I've drank too much absinthe.
So I guess that's kind of us, apart from trailing our next time, book 7.
Oh yeah, pyramids. I would say, is that right?
It's pyramids.
Let's
yes,
go back up again. It is.
I glimpsed. So I have no idea what that's going to be. I have no preconceptions.
It'll be an interesting one. We'll not get into it now. It'll be the first of the true standalone Discworld books. Ooh. So that'll be an interesting one. And it's been a really long time. I read this one really young, for sure. And my memory of it's quite vague. I remember I got it out of the library in... I don't know how to tell these stories now. Tell these stories next time. Just forget it. Go home, everybody. We're done.
Join us here in 31 days. We're not coming in early just because it's February. We'll see you when we see you.
Indeed.
Thanks so much for joining us.
A pleasure as always. And Andy, you have now...
Have I ever read Discworld?
I think we should start mixing these up. I think we should start coming up with bespoke closers. If anybody's got any ideas, do write in and let us know. Because he started reading Discworld ages ago now. We have to give him something else to say at the end of the episode. So let's have a think about that. And until then, we'll see you next month for Pyramids.
Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye.